And it's the same thing with Jeremy Corbyn in the UK. Now, there has been a very sinister alliance between the Jewish groups who are acting as Israeli agents in British society and British ruling elites who dread the prospect of a Corbyn victory, because Corbyn is the real deal. Bernie's basically Corbyn light. Yes, but it's not bad, because Corbyn's he's the real deal. He doesn't like the idea of homelessness in this world. He's not the kind of guy who thinks it's enough to put $1 in their cup on your way to the Hamptons. So, what you have in the UK is an unusual phenomenon, because historically the Jewish groups, the mainstream Jewish groups, they played the anti-Semitism card every time Israel faced a public relations debacle for one of its periodic massacres. And they would start charging all the critics of being anti-Semitic, which is a familiar and old tune. However, now, in the case of Corbyn, the British ruling elites decided, let's join in with these Jewish groups who are acting at Israel's behest, but let's use that charge to try to discredit Corbyn so that he won't get elected, not because they care about Israel, but because they care about preserving a status quo from which they've benefited. And so now, across the board, it's a really astonishing thing to observe from afar, as I have closely. From the Guardian newspaper on the so-called left to the Daily Mail on the so-called right, and everything in between, BBC, Sky News, The Times, they're all claiming that Jeremy Corbyn is a dyed-in-the-wool anti-Semite, and that anti-Semitism has been institutionalized in the Labour Party. That's the term they use. It's been institutionalized. If you look at the most recent polls, 2/3 of British polled think Corbyn now is an anti-Semite, which is kind of loony if you know who he is and what he stands for. And it's almost certain, well, first of all, so far it appears, it hasn't had much of an effect on likely voters in an election, because the attitude is, well, maybe he's an anti-Semite, but really who cares, because we care about those economic issues, which is what he's talking about. So they accept that he might be or is, but they don't really, it's not going to change their vote. And what's happening in the UK is basically a dress rehearsal for what's going to happen here. Now, of course, it's going to be difficult to make the charge of anti-Semite stick on Bernie Sanders for a number of reasons, which most of you seem to have an intuitive grasp of, not least his Brooklyn Jewish accent. However, he is surrounded by a lot of people on whom that charge will stick. Right now in the UK, the Labour Party, in order to deflect the allegation of anti-Semitism, has been carrying on all these purges of alleged anti-Semites in the party, many of whom I know by reputation, and the allegations are completely nuts. But the Labour Party, in my opinion, stupidly believing you can appease these forces and stupidly believing it has anything to do with anti-Semitism. It has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. The case of the Jewish organizations, it's Israel, it's not anti-Semitism. And the case of British elites, it's holding on to a status quo from which they've benefited. In the US, it's interesting to watch. It's interesting to watch because it's the prelude to what's going to come next year. How Bernie is reacting to Ilhan Omar, because they're waiting to see if he distances himself publicly from her. They know he will start carrying on the same purges as are going on in the Labour Party in the UK, and his campaign will be destroyed from within. Because they'll find Ilhan Omar type remarks in 10,000 people surrounding Bernie's campaign. And so far, to my surprise, I might say, he's been supporting her. And that's a good sign, that he's not going to let them use the anti-Semitism charge to wreck his campaign, as is now being used in the British case in an attempt to wreck Jeremy Corbyn's campaign. But it will come. There was just a report yesterday that AIPAC had these advertisements in Facebook attacking Bernie for his statements on Israel, or alleged statements on Israel. Now, as I said, I don't think it's going to be easy to make them stick with him, but it's going to be a problem with a lot of people around him. And we're going to have to wait and see how he handles it. And hopefully people like Ilhan Omar and AOC will figure out a way how to be principled on the one hand, but not hand anything to these thugs and machinators, anything to them that will make it easy for them to discredit Bernie's supporters and will force him to publicly distance himself, which I think will be a complete disaster. So far, so good. But it's going to be a tough battle. And if you have any curiosity about how it will play out, just take a gander across the pond and watch what they've been doing to Corbyn. It's been nonstop. Last summer, for 3 months, non-stop. Every newspaper, every news program was just the Jeremy anti-Semitism thing.